Greetings, Michael Tracy here, TYT. Guess what? It's Russia Mania once again. Very exciting times. Everybody is talking about the new Russia-related news. I did a video on this last night, but I have some additional thoughts. I just put out a Medium post for the TYT Medium account, which will be linked in the description box, of course, for your convenience. So read that for my contextualization of what's going on with this revelation that Jeff Sessions may or may not have made a misleading statement before Congress regarding his communications with Russian officials. So the first thing is, I have no affinity whatever for Jeff Sessions. He is somebody who I would most certainly not want to be Attorney General, aka overseeing the entirety of the federal legal apparatus, for a host of reasons, chief among them being his retrograde attitude toward drug prohibition. He's always been a very stalwart drug warrior, opposing any reduction in prison sentences for drug offenders and so on and so forth. And that's just the beginning. Obviously, he has some sketchy attitudes toward race and racial matters. So that's a starting point. No affinity at all for Jeff Sessions. And I do think it's worth noting that he may well have perjured himself with the statement that he made to Al Franken during his confirmation hearing in the Senate. I think a reasonable characterization, and this is the way that the ACLU has put it, is that Sessions' statement was potentially perjurious. So I don't think it's reasonable to rush to judgment and just declare that perjury has been committed. Obviously, perjury is hard to prove. There's a high standard for convicting someone of perjury. The lie that somebody states under oath has to be willful, and the intent has to be established that they knowingly made a statement that they knew to be false. So I think it would probably be difficult to prove perjury here. And but nonetheless, I think potentially perjurious rather, is a reasonable characterization. But the broader point is that this story, which broke last night, followed the same pattern that we continuously see with how Russia-Trump-related revelations are processed by the broader media ecosystem. So the step one is that the New York Times or Washington Post, or on occasion CNN, breaks a story drawn from their sources in the intelligence community, or in the, quote, deep state, who give them information that ostensibly seems damning. Then the headlines, which is how most people consume news, right? They look at a headline, they get a snippet of information here and there, and they say, oh, wow, that's very damning. Looks like Sessions may have done something to cover up his role in acting as some kind of facilitator between Trump and the Russians. So everybody got very excited and kind of proclaimed this to be a smoking gun. That's how this stuff tends to work. The initial revelation is seen as very jarring and very exciting, and then people get ahead of themselves and proclaim that as the final smoking gun that we've all been waiting for, to establish collusion between Trump and Russia. And then what inevitably happens next is that without even taking a few moments to just reflect on the import of the story or contextualize it or just take a breath, you see the typical kind of coterie of pundits and Democratic politicians proclaim that this really is, the final straw, in that their worries or their allegations of some kind of collusion between Trump and Russia is finally substantiated. And then the interesting thing that I'm always amused by is that you have this whole kind of cohort of aggrieved Clinton apparatchik types who are essentially propagandists, so people associated with Media Matters, people associated with David Brock apparatus, who kind of spring into action and try to connect the dots. And the way they're dot connecting really eerily resembles the sort of dot connecting that you would have seen in, say, 2009 among the Glenn Beck crowd. They might as well just take out their chalkboard and like do the whole routine where they're presenting bombshell information to their viewers about how there's kind of this unifying reason why things are going wrong. It's just kind of classic conspiratorial thinking and paranoid thinking. And it's funny because liberals tend to think of themselves as above that impulse, but they really indulge in it just as much as anybody. So in the Medium post, I linked to a tweet from Eric Boehlert, who's a good friend of mine, doing just that. And he's done that many times. And then what you see happen is self-proclaimed legal experts get on Twitter or get on some other forum and declare that they have certitude that some legal infraction has been committed. So this happened most recently when the Mike Flynn news came out. You saw a whole group of people kind of proclaiming themselves to be experts on the Logan Act, which was a 200-year-old act under which nobody has ever been prosecuted. It just became a truism in certain liberal media circles and among certain some conservatives as well that Flynn was obviously guilty of violating this 200-year-old act under which for which there is no precedent, which hasn't been litigated, and just is not a living issue in any reasonable sense. So you see a similar thing happening today where people are just absolutely certain that Sessions committed perjury. I would say potentially, like I said earlier, potentially perjurious is reasonable, but the idea that it's just straightforward and clear that he committed perjury when there are reasonable interpretations of his comment that would lead one to believe that it wasn't perjury is just sort of silly, and it's just a rash impulse that I think people who are primed to believe the worst possible interpretation of every Trump-related revelation have been promoting. And I quoted Benjamin Wittes, who's a legal scholar for this Lawfare blog website, which is usually pretty reliable. And he says, quote, "Okay, listen, I have no brief for Sessions, but to be clear, this is almost certainly not perjury. Stop imputing criminal conduct prematurely." So again, casting doubt on whether perjury is applicable here. It's not a defense of Sessions on a characterological level. You can still loathe Sessions and not believe that he committed perjury or that perjury is a likely perjury conviction is a likely outcome of this latest controversy. And I think, on a broader level, what's really insidious in my view, and I've experienced this firsthand now, having covered a host of Democratic town halls and trying to get a flavor of where the Democratic base is at this point. What these stories accomplish in practical terms is the implanting into the minds of the most activated Democratic activists that Russia is the most salient issue on which to oppose Trump. So they see it routinely resulting in controversies. So it resulted in the Flynn controversy, which caused the first really major resignation of the Trump administration. There are investigations happening in Congress right now. There's an FBI counterintelligence investigation. I assume that has a criminal element as well, but it's hard to tell exactly. Excuse me. Sorry. So the insidious thing is now this has become such an obsession among Democratic activists, and the obsession keeps getting reinforced by this news events. So the impulse is to see what I think is most likely political ineptitude on Sessions' part as evidence of some sort of sinister plot that is underway and is being covered up. Most of the time, the conspiratorial explanation, where everything is calculated and everything is planned, is not the most reasonable explanation. More often, the most accurate explanation is political ineptitude and just basic incompetence. I think that was what was on display during the Flynn affair, Flynn's underlying offense wasn't outrageous, meaning he spoke to a Russian ambassador about reducing tensions between the U.S. and Russia. If Flynn committed any wrongdoing, it was that he was politically inept in his handling of the subsequent discussion of that phone conversation or conversations. And so I think there's something similar going on here with Sessions. This controversy could have been avoided if, when he was under questioning, Sessions had just said something along the lines of, in my informal capacity as a Trump campaign surrogate. Remember, the notion of a campaign surrogate, it's not a neatly defined role. So when you stop being a senator and when you begin to be a campaign surrogate, totally unclear. But nevertheless, Sessions could have avoided this by simply saying during the confirmation hearing, in my capacity as a Trump campaign surrogate, no, I did not have any communications with Russian officials, but as would be completely normal and expected, in my capacity as a senator, yes, I did communicate with Russian officials. Controversy avoided. The only trouble is that if he had made that admission during his confirmation hearing, it would have been taken by Democrats as evidence of some kind of sinister Russia collusion, and it could have potentially hobbled him over the course of his confirmation process, hearing process. Maybe some Republicans could have been siphoned off and voted against him on that basis. So did Sessions just kind of lazily fumble through an answer that was meant to be slightly evasive so as not to deal with the political fallout of being straightforward and truthful? Perhaps. I think that's probably a likely explanation. I really doubt that his intent was to cover up his role in this conspiracy that a lot of people want to believe is out there. So you have a combination of the political ineptitude of Trump's people and the tendency on the part of Democrats and liberals to believe in the most outlandish possible version of what's gone on and keep pushing the Trump-Russia conspiracy, which is and those things kind of combine to create this warped atmosphere, which will probably lead to another revelation in a week or two that plays out very similarly to how this one has played out and how most previous revelations have played out. So it's pretty depressing. You can read that article on Medium if you want. It'll be linked again in the description box. That's my take. And again, I think it's worth noting that everybody who has expressed skepticism about the prevailing narrative on this issue, everybody who's credible, who's expressed skepticism, has always said that the basis of their skepticism is insufficient evidence as to the grand narrative that so many people are trying to weave with regard to Putin-Trump collusion or illicit cooperation. So I'm open to that evidence. I have strong doubts that the congressional investigations underway right now, which are so partisan and being led by Democrats who have an incentive to kind of feed this raw meat to their base, or red meat, not raw meat, to feed that kind of red meat to their base about Trump and Russia, I really strongly doubt that they are going to produce a fruitful investigation that's going to give us any real insight into this topic. But because the investigations at this point are inevitable, I think it's probably correct that Sessions not be charged with overseeing the FBI version of the investigation. So I think that's reasonable. I would have probably said that even prior to last night, it wouldn't be proper for him to oversee that investigation just because it's better if it's independent. So that is it, and I will see you later.